All right. It is the end of the year, and while I will be going through my top 24 of 2024 in another video, I wanted to highlight some of the more underrated films of the year here as well. And maybe underrated is a bit of a misnomer. What I'm really aiming to do here is to shine a light on some films that have been receiving less attention than I think they deserve. In fact, most of these films actually are quite highly rated from the folks who have seen them, but I just think that more people need to lay their eyes on some of these projects. Number 10 is As We Speak. I was fortunate enough to catch the world premiere of As We Speak at Sundance almost a year ago, and I was even able to chat with the director, J.M. Harper, and some of the stars of the film on the red carpet. The director, J.M. Harper, prior to this film, was probably most known for editing the Genius trilogy, Kanye West trilogy, and from my conversation with him, it became clear pretty quickly to me that he is a super intelligent dude and kind of a visionary filmmaker. In this particular project, As We Speak, he explores the weaponization of rap lyrics in the criminal justice system, primarily in the US, but also a bit across the pond. He doesn't just settle for your kind of standard talking head style documentary. Instead, he uses real-life rapper Kemba from the Bronx. You can find him on Spotify. He was an absolute joy to talk to as well. Harper employs Kemba as essentially our protagonist to go around and have real discussion with folks who are potentially impacted by this weaponization of rap lyrics. And as we follow him, we almost forget that we're watching a documentary. Instead, because of the stylistic choices in cinematography and in editing, it makes it feel like we're watching a narrative feature. And on top of that, there is a brilliant scene where we have some drill artists performing Romeo and Juliet. So really, what more can you ask for? Number 9 is Humane. We know David Cronenberg. The Fly, Crimes of the Future, Crash. Most of us now know his son, Brandon Cronenberg, with projects like Possessor and Infinity Pool. But there's another Cronenberg who is making her mark with her directorial debut this year. Caitlin Cronenberg, it turns out, is the funny Cronenberg. And that's not to say that Caitlin Cronenberg doesn't kind of channel some of her father's quintessential body horror. There are a couple of brief moments in the film that really show her familial ties, but it's through her comedy, it's through these comedic aspects of the film that she really excels. Humane is set in the relatively near future and follows a family as they're faced head-on with a global overpopulation crisis. Long story short, someone has to die and they can't quite figure out who that someone should be. Cronenberg called on fellow Canadian Jay Baruchel to perform here, and he delivers a super solid performance, but really the most memorable lines, almost without exception, belong to Enrico Colantoni. He had me physically laughing out loud like very few performances this year. And I will admit, on the whole, Humane probably isn't quite at the same level as the better works of David and Brandon Cronenberg, but Caitlin really has demonstrated a side of the Cronenbergs that we don't often see. Number 8 is Riddle of Fire. I don't even fully know what to say about this movie. It is an absolute joy of a project from director Weston Rizzulli. It follows three young children who set off on this fantasy-filled adventure while they're supposed to be running an errand for the mother of two of the children. And it's a movie that really shouldn't work. If only one or two pieces are shifted ever so slightly, it just comes crumbling down. But despite this, against all odds, it really kept me engaged from start to finish. The line delivery from the children here, from the kids, most notably Skylar Peters, had me losing my mind. He delivers them in a way that goes against all acting advice you would ever receive, but it just makes his character that much more endearing to us as the audience. We see some young love, we see makeshift weapons, mystical mountains, and honestly, probably my favorite dance sequence of the entire year. Riddle of Fire is a film that is just destined, it's meant to be a cult classic in the best possible way. Number 7 is Porcelain War. I was super fortunate to be able to chat with co-director Brendan Belomo and producer Paula Dupree-Pesman after watching this documentary, and our conversation just made me appreciate the work that we see here on screen on an even deeper level. Porcelain War is set during the ongoing invasion of Ukraine, and it showcases art from three Ukrainian individuals, Anya, Slava, and Andrei. Anya and Slava make these beautiful porcelain figurines, which forms the metaphorical basis of the project, obviously represented by the title Porcelain War. And essentially this showcases or highlights the irony of porcelain, of this art that's being created. It's simultaneously delicate, but yet somewhat indestructible. It can always be repaired, which is something that these artists come back to. And throughout the film, we follow them as we kind of uncomfortably veer between these gorgeous macro shots of the landscape in Ukraine and then shift toward the chaos, the violence, and we see the rubble in the background. And what these three artists make so clear really early on in the movie is that art is foundational to our existence as humans. And during the war, the enemy will almost inevitably make an attempt to destroy the artist. And when you destroy the artist, you destroy the people and the culture that comes with it. So essentially, by continuing to practice their art as the conflict wages on, this artistic expression serves as a kind of covert tool of resistance. But they are also quite literally close to the front lines, and Slava even works as a weapons instructor for civilians entering the war. At the end of the day, it's a super poignant depiction of art and destruction in a way that I haven't quite seen before. Number 6 is The Last Stop in Yuma County. This is another project where I was super lucky, super fortunate to be able to chat with the filmmaker, in this case, Francis Galuppi. And while I wasn't able to disclose it at the time, this is kind of a cool little story. Francis actually had another call lined up right after mine with none other than Sam Raimi, and they were chatting about Francis potentially being given a shot at directing the next Evil Dead film, which has since become official, so I can share that little story. Needless to say, Galuppi is a director who is on a very quick rise. In his feature directorial debut in The Last Stop in Yuma County, he shows a super strong understanding of genre, of tone, of pacing, and ultimately of creating suspense. Something that I gained from talking with him is just how deep and sincere his knowledge and appreciation for film really is, and that obviously shows up on screen. It's essentially a film noir, kind of employing some of these tropes within the genre, including the corruption of the everyman. And it's super interesting. It's shot at a single location where a number of restaurant and gas station patrons kind of unknowingly become part of an attempted bank robbery escape. Things hit the fan pretty quickly, and it's all done with such style. This is obviously in part due to Galuppi, but also his cinematographer, Mac Fiskin, who is another name that I would keep an eye out for. They create such a beautiful noir mood, and they had very limited coverage, which essentially means that they weren't shooting from multiple angles for these different scenes. And what we ultimately see on screen is pretty much frame by frame exactly what they had storyboarded. Number 5 is The Girl with the Needle. This is an absolutely gorgeous black and white film rooted in German expressionism. It's a super wonderful time to watch this one, considering that arguably the most famous film emerging from that movement is Nosferatu, which has, of course, received a remake from Robert Eggers this year. So, why not line up a double feature with The Girl with the Needle and Nosferatu? This one is rooted in the true story of Danish serial killer Dagmar Overby. Sorry if that pronunciation is a bit off, but she killed somewhere between 9 and 25 children between 1913 and 1920 while working as a child caretaker. The film itself, though, is less concerned with the serial killer, less concerned with Dagmar, and more concerned with Caroline, who is a fictional woman who loses her job shortly after becoming pregnant and ends up working for Dagmar before realizing exactly what she's up to. What seems to interest the director Magnus Van Horn are the societal structures that really seem to reinforce both class and gender roles. We have commentary on social movement or lack thereof, and also on things like reproductive rights. But this commentary is done subtly and never feels forced. Instead, we're drawn in by these beautifully tense visuals. We have a surrealist melding of faces as the opening shots, and we're kept captivated throughout by an extremely hauntingly discordant score. The music is phenomenal. And ultimately, it's a super dark fairy tale. Think less Disney and more Brothers Grimm. Number 4 is Small Things Like These. Small Things Like These seems to be getting a bit more attention in Europe, but over here in North America, I've heard, honestly, almost no one talk about it, which to me is a real shame. It's the first film from Cillian Murphy's new production company, Big Things Films, and it stars Murphy himself as a humble coal merchant who discovers the truth of the Magdalene laundries, where women were essentially being abused and exploited by the Catholic Church. Similar to The Girl with the Needle, director Tim Mielents here is concerned less with exploring the details of this trauma within the laundries, which is based on true events, but instead chooses to focus on the more individual trauma and grief of Cillian Murphy's character. This movie is slow. It's thoughtful. It never moves more quickly than it needs to, nor does it move in any direction that is unnecessary. We spend a lot of time sitting with Murphy as he revisits his past and deals with a sense of kind of cognitive dissonance that ultimately becomes inescapable. The visuals here are quite muted and subdued. This small Irish town is covered in a seemingly irremovable fog, which contributes to this rising unease throughout. I will say some folks might be disappointed if they're expecting a more thorough exploration of the history and experiences within the laundries. But if you approach the film knowing that this isn't really the focal point, it's more of the backdrop, it really is a beautiful film that's worth just sitting with. Number 3 is Daughters. Okay, this one is on Netflix, but for one reason or another, no one seems to be watching it. It may have briefly appeared on your home screen, but if you didn't click on it immediately, it silently became relegated to the Netflix ether. And that's not the life that Daughters deserves. I'm gonna be straight up, this documentary had me weeping. It's a super honest story of daughters and their incarcerated fathers. It's rooted in a real life program, the Daddy-Daughter Dance, that more or less aims to provide opportunities for daughters to connect or reconnect with their fathers in jail. The program also requires these men to go through a 12-week program where we get some of the most emotionally vulnerable moments of the film. The documentary is twofold. So we follow the daughters as they do their best to figure out this crazy world without their fathers there. And we also follow the fathers in prison as they break down these kind of barriers of their masculinity to have open and honest conversations with each other and to understand the hurt that they've caused. Obviously, these men struggle with this kind of emotional vulnerability, so it is quite impactful. And honestly, if it doesn't get you tearing up, I'm not sure what will. Admittedly, I'm a sucker for art that is able to kind of break down this masculine facade, and we see this happen so naturally with the men in this film. And we're also given no choice but to sit with their daughters as they experience this pain of separation and the impact of this lack of a father figure in their day-to-day lives. Co-directors Natalie Ray and Angela Patton have done something, I think, special here, and it's a shame that it's currently buried somewhere deep in Netflix's catalog. Number 2 is Exhibiting Forgiveness. Exhibiting Forgiveness was one of my favorite films from this year's Sundance Festival, but for one reason or another, it has been sitting for most of this year in distribution purgatory with only a couple of very select showings throughout the year. It has been announced, though, that it will be coming to online platforms January 14th. I would have loved for this film to have a wider theatrical release. I'm still happy that more people are going to be able to give it a watch in the new year. This film is a semi-autobiographical project from director Titus Gaffar. It follows Andre Holland as he deals with the trauma of his childhood and the very fraught relationship with his father, played by John Earl Jelks. Both Holland and Jelks are honestly phenomenal here, and the rest of the cast is as well. The performances are very, very strong. Holland's character, like Kafar, is a painter who is working on an exhibit rooted in the events of his childhood. And as he works through these paintings, he's working through the emotions that come with them. And it's at this point that his father makes an attempt at reconnection and reconciliation. What Kafar is able to do here so masterfully is give us a really genuine journey of forgiving or choosing not to forgive. Genuine makes sense given that it's rooted in his own experience with his father. And something that he's mentioned while discussing the film is that there isn't just like a clear thesis about whether you need to forgive those who have wronged you, but it's really more about shining a light on one specific journey. There is no right or wrong approach here. And it's another emotional one, backed up, like I mentioned, by some very, very strong performances. Number 1 is Ghostlight. Look, I'm going to be honest, this honor could probably go to any of the films that I've discussed thus far, but Ghostlight is, or at least seems deserving of it, for bringing such a massive emotional impact coming from a very small foundation. It was made for less than $1 million and was shot and edited in 1 month back in October 2023, just in time to make the cut for Sundance at the beginning of 2024. Not only that, but our 2 leads who play father and daughter in the film are real life father and daughter. The father was cast first. He said, hey, I think my daughter would be great for this role. She auditioned and got the part. Their performances, I would say, are not perfect. They're probably pretty far away from being technically perfect, but it's this rawness that really grounds the film, and it probably wouldn't be the same film if their performances were more polished. Basically, the movie follows a family who are struggling after the death of their son the previous year. And so we have the daughter acting out. The parents are holding on to their marriage by a thread. The mother's doing everything she can to essentially keep them together. And the father is just alternating between radio silence and bombastic outbursts. One thing leads to another, and Dan, the father, ends up stumbling into a local theater group and, against his own will, at least initially, is forced into a role in their upcoming production of Romeo and Juliet. Fast forward, his daughter also becomes involved in the play, ultimately bringing the family back together. And I realize that when I describe it so poorly like that, it comes across as maybe a bit of a cheeseball Hallmark drama, but it really is far from that. It's a rough and real portrayal of parenting and these very difficult yet almost or close to unbreakable bonds between parent and child. It's also another exploration of masculinity and our inability, it seems, as men to be able to express ourselves in a productive fashion. It's heartwarming and it's heart-wrenching, and more people should be watching this film. Oh, and it also has Dolly De Leon in another role after her breakout performance in Triangle of Sadness a couple of years ago. So basically, what are you doing? Put it on your TV screen now. You can stream it on Amazon Prime Video, or you can rent it online. Honestly, genuinely, thank you so much for watching. There's obviously many more movies that I could have talked about here, so feel free to suggest a couple of your own, but I hope that you were able to add at least one to your watch list. Please do subscribe for more, including the top 24 films of 2024. A couple of these will be on that list. A like and comment to fuel this terrible, terrible YouTube algorithm. And all of you are appreciated. So have a great day. Cheers.